National Aviation Speed Weapons. He served in the Army Air Forces as a pilot during World War II, and later as chief of the Department of Defense's magazine and book division. He's written a book entitled The Doolittle Raid. It serves as the definitive historical account of one of the most significant events in our military history. And he worked closely with General Doolittle in writing General Doolittle's autobiography entitled, I Could Never Be So Lucky Again. And now, to walk us through a history of the Doolittle Raid, please welcome Colonel C.D. Glines.
Thank you, sir. I'm just wondering if my grandson, Kevin, is in the audience. He has my booklet. I particularly want him to be introduced because his last name is Hudson. Kevin Hudson. Thank you, Kevin. Well, I know the story. The story, of course, is registered right back here. This is the marker that the Raiders authored themselves years ago. It was one of the first memorials to units here in this memorial garden. Well, the unprovoked attack by Japanese naval forces on Hawaii on December 7, 41 was followed by more than 4 months of further American defeat in the Pacific, imminent surrender of American forces in the Philippines. American morale was the lowest it had ever been in American history. President Roosevelt appealed to his military commanders to find some way to strike back at the Japanese homeland. The answer was a bold strike by American land-based bombers launched from the deck of a Navy carrier. April the 18th, exactly 70 years ago today, 16 Army B-25 Mitchell bombers under the command of Lieutenant Colonel James H. Jimmy Doolittle flew from the Hornet and attacked targets in 5 major Japanese cities, including Tokyo. The Japanese were completely surprised because they did not believe the United States had any aircraft with enough range to attack their homeland. The Naval Task Force was intercepted by a radio-equipped fishing boat. The decision was made to launch the bombers about 650 miles from Japan, which was more than 200 miles farther than Japan had been planned. This meant the bombers would probably not have enough fuel to continue to a planned landing in China. The B-25 bombed their respective targets, and 15 of them headed on their escape route to China. The pilot of the 16th plane, exceptionally short of fuel, decided to head for Russia, where he hoped to gas up and then proceed to the Chinese base instead. The crew of 5 was interned for the next 14 months until they escaped into Iran. When the other 15 planes headed near China, short of fuel and in deteriorating weather and darkness, the crews had to bail out or crash land near the beach. 2 of the raiders died swimming to shore, and 1 died on the bailout. 8 were captured by the Japanese, and after a mock trial in the Japanese language, 3 were executed by a firing squad, and a 4th died of malnutrition. The other 4 were tortured, never to be released, but survived the war and were released in 1945. All the other crew members were assisted by the Chinese and escorted to safety, although thousands of them were later murdered by rampaging Japanese troops because they helped the Americans. The damage to Japanese targets by the B-25 was minimal, but the adverse psychological impact on the Japanese people was extraordinary, because they had been told that their homeland islands could never be attacked. On the other hand, signs that the nation could and would fight back. Hoping to retaliate, the Japanese changed their Pacific strategy and launched an attack on Midway, June of 1942, in which 4 of their aircraft carriers, scores of planes, and hundreds of men were lost. Thus, the Doolittle raid marked an important turning point in the history of World War II. Today, there are 5 survivors, and 4 of them are here today. The 5th was unable to make it. The rest of them all of them are in their 90s now, and I have a little bit to say about each one of them. Dick Cole was a co-pilot for General Doolittle, and you might think that because of what they did on that particular day, this day 70 years ago today, that they may have gone on to other things because they became noted for having flown in the Doolittle raid, but not so. They went on to other assignments, and Dick Cole stayed in China for a while, came back to the States briefly, then went back to China the second time and served with the 1st Aero Commandos. So he had a second war, and that was very secret at the time. And the next man there is Dave Thatcher. Dave Thatcher was in crew number 7, and you've heard about that one because that's the author of the book Before Came Home. I mean, that's my book. 32nd over Tokyo was his pilot, and Dave Thatcher and his crew were hurt. Dave was not as badly hurt as the other 4 members of his crew, but he received the Silver Star later for helping his crew survive and tested their wounds and had them evade and helped them evade the Japanese. Third man there is Tom Griffin, and Tom also came back to the States after the raid. Immediately got into a B-26 unit, went to North Africa, and had a forced landing in the water in the Med on one mission. But on another mission then, he was shot down for the second time and bailed out for the second time, and became a prisoner of war of the Germans for the rest of the war. Next is, on the end is Ed Saylor. Ed was an enlisted man and a machine gunner, a gunner and bombardier, and were in one of the aircraft, the 15th aircraft. And he became an officer later and served as an exchange officer with the RAF in England. So these men lived much more of a war than you would imagine, because their fame did not precede them as far as many of the people were concerned. But we know what they did, and we'll always remember them before the Doolittle raid on Japan. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm certainly pleased that you're all here because of the Raiders. And as I like to keep reminding people, and I hope a lot of you have my captions that they appear, I'm a writer, not a raider. And I want that clear because I was asked to sit in the front row with all the pictures we took before. So get that straight. They're the 4 Raiders, not me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.